Allow me to say something that will likely annoy a lot of coaches and probably make a lot of leaders quietly nod. If you think you know where your next coaching session is going to end up, you're not coaching, you're teaching. And that's not an insult. Teaching can be brilliant, but it's not coaching because good leadership coaches don't know where they're going. Now, if that sounds reckless, if it sounds like I'm advocating winging it, stay with me because this is exactly where most executive coaching quietly fails. And it fails for a very specific reason. Most coaching today is built on thinking. But what leaders need, what people need, is being. And if you miss that distinction, you can do years of coaching, use all the right frameworks, ask all the right questions, and still leave the client stuck inside the same identity, the same stress response, the same patterns, just with better vocabulary. So in this video, I'm going to show you why the coach carries the client from A to B metaphor breaks down in leadership coaching, why frameworks and methodologies can actually block transformation, what the two dimensions of real executive coaching are, and how this connects to self-leadership, because without self-leadership, there's no leadership at all. If you're a senior leader, this will explain why some coaching feels helpful but limited. If you're a coach, it will show you why doing coaching properly can still miss the point. Let's go. The word coach originally comes from a very simple idea. An Oxford tutor would carry a student through exams, like a coach, the vehicle, carries you from point A to point B. That metaphor works beautifully for teaching, instruction, training, and to some extent mentoring, because in those contexts, the tutor does know where they're going. They know the syllabus, they know what competence looks like, they know the exam questions and the marking criteria, so the path can be mapped. But executive and leadership coaching, different game, because leadership isn't an exam and life isn't a syllabus. Your client isn't a problem to solve. They're a human being under pressure trying to lead other human beings. And this is why the metaphor collapses. A leadership coach cannot genuinely know the destination in advance. If you do know the destination in advance, you're not exploring, you're delivering. Again, nothing wrong with delivering, but it's teaching. And here's where things get interesting. Most coaches, especially in corporate settings, lean heavily on a methodology, a process, a framework, a model, anything vaguely algorithmic, because it feels safe. It reduces uncertainty. It gives you something to do. It reassures you that you're being professional. But there's a catch. Frameworks are artifacts of the past, being imposed on the present. They're constructs of thinking. And thinking, by its nature, doesn't live in the now. Thinking reviews, compares, predicts, analyzes. It works with memory and projection. And yes, intellect is a spectacular instrument. It's responsible for much of what humanity has built. But intellect cannot meet a deeper requirement that leaders are starving for. Connection. Not connection with others, though that matters. I mean connection with themselves at the level of being. And that's the part most coaching doesn't even know exists, let alone touches. So what happens? The client becomes more articulate about their situation, they gather insights, they may even make improvements. But the deeper pattern, the identity they're operating from, stays intact. They're still the same person doing a better job of managing the same internal conflict. And that's why some coaching produces progress, but not transformation. The real crisis is misalignment. Here's a statement from my article on this subject that I think is absolutely central. One of the prime causes of our explosion of physical and mental health issues is disconnection, a lack of alignment between who we think we are and who we really are. I'll say that again. One of the prime causes of our explosion of physical and mental health issues is disconnection, a lack of alignment between who we think we are and who we really are. Because if you're a leader dealing with stress, burnout, anxiety, conflict, this is the territory. It's not just workload, it's not just your boss, it's not just the organization, it's the inner tension of living from an idea of yourself that isn't true. And leadership roles intensify that, because leadership demands performance. So you take on an identity. I'm the capable one. I'm the dependable one. I must not show weakness. I must be in control. I must have the answers. I can't disappoint. And those identities sound mature, but often they're just sophisticated survival mechanisms. Now here's the brutal part. The intellect can't solve this disconnection because the intellect created it. So what is the job of a coach really? Not to push someone toward a goal, but to gently lead them back into alignment, back into self-connection, back into being. And that cannot be done purely intellectually, which brings us to the question, how do you do it? The first step is deceptively simple. Create a present connection with the client. And before your intellect makes this spiritual or woo-woo, let me be clear, this is not esoteric. It's almost embarrassingly simple. You listen and you ask whatever question comes to mind. You hold a non-judgmental curiosity with no agenda other than understanding and connecting with what's being said. No fixes, no solutions, just presence. Now, if you're a coach, you'll recognize what happens next. That simplicity feels terrifying because we carry a self-imposed burden. I need to have answers. I need to deliver value. I need to solve this. And that burden is so heavy that we retreat almost unconsciously into frameworks and structures for support. But if you can put those expectations down, if you can trust the intelligence that only operates in the present, extraordinary things can happen. Not because you did something clever, but because you created the conditions for the client to reconnect with themselves. And once that reconnection happens, insight doesn't have to be manufactured. It arrives. But there's a paradox. Even though the goal is to reduce the influence of thinking on experience, most of the time you get there by engaging with the intellect. But there's a paradox. You have to use a thorn to remove a thorn. Even though the goal is to reduce the influence of thinking on experience, most of the time you get there by engaging with the intellect. Because both coach and client are under the gravitational pull of thinking. So you respect the status quo and you work with it. This is the thorn to remove a thorn idea. You use thinking to uncover the architecture of thinking, and what you're looking for is the network of thoughts the client is identified with, belief systems, mindsets, often subconscious beliefs about who they are. Now, this is important. These beliefs are not just opinions. They are identity structures, and they run the leader's emotional life. For example, if I don't push, nothing happens. If I delegate, I'll lose control. If I'm not needed, I'm irrelevant. If I'm not the strongest, I'll be exposed. If I say no, I'll be rejected. These are not just thoughts. They are the operating system. And my article makes a strong claim. We all have these embedded beliefs, and they are all false because who we are cannot be defined by an idea formed in the past. Who we are cannot be thought about. It can only be experienced in the present as being. So what does real executive coaching require? Executive or leadership coaching needs two dimensions. One, the discovery and refinement of conscious and subconscious thinking. And two, the reconnection to self beyond thinking. Let's unpack that. Dimension one, refine the thinking. This often does require some instruction. It can include some psychology, an understanding of perception, belief formation, and what my article calls the nature of reality, metaphysics. Now, some people are allergic to the word metaphysics, but all it really means here is, what is experience made of? How does perception work? What is the relationship between thought and feeling? What is the relationship between identity and behavior? Because a leader's reality is not objective, it's interpreted. And when you can see the interpretive machinery, when you can see how meaning is being manufactured, something loosens. But here's the key. The first dimension is a means, not an end. The ultimate goal is the second dimension, which is to reconnect to being. This is the reconnection to self, not as an idea, but as a lived sense of alignment. This is where leaders stop trying to manage their lives from the head alone. They regain an internal center of gravity, and from that place, they become calmer without suppression, clearer without control, stronger without force. And this is why some coaching creates leaders who are high functioning but still exhausted, because they did dimension 1 without dimension 2. They refine the intellect but never reconnected to themselves. My article even warns of the imbalance. Work on A, beliefs, but not B, being, and the client stays planted in their intellect. Work on B, being, but not A, beliefs, and you may struggle for traction by failing to find common ground. In other words, you need both. Now, where does leadership fit in? Leadership is the business of leading others, hopefully to do great things. But how do you lead others without being able to lead yourself? My observation is that without self-leadership, there is no leadership at all. Because if you cannot regulate your own perception, if you cannot see your own identity traps, if you are constantly being yanked around by fear, pride, people-pleasing, performance addiction, etc., then you will lead from compensation. You'll lead from image management. You'll lead from control. And yes, you can still get results, but the cost is culture. The cost is relationships. The cost is your health. And if this is starting to sound like personal development, good, because it is. My article says it plainly. Leadership, executive development, and personal development are inextricably intertwined. Great leaders are self-aware. Only through understanding themselves can they hope to understand anyone else. And only through being inspired by their own sense of purpose, integrity, and fulfillment can they genuinely inspire others. So what does this approach actually produce? There are some concrete outcomes of this two-dimensional approach. Let me translate them into real-world leadership behavior. Culture shaping. You can influence behavior consciously, not reactively. Resilience. You can face adversity without becoming emotionally hijacked. Integrity. You stay true to yourself and aren't deflected by opinions and politics. Inspiration. You energize people through a meaningful vision. Delegation. You delegate not just tasks, but real responsibility. Purpose. You move towards goals creatively and relentlessly, not compulsively. Fulfillment. You feel value and connection independent of circumstances. The last one is huge, because many leaders chase fulfillment through achievement. But fulfillment isn't an outcome, it's a state of alignment. And when leaders have that alignment, performance often improves. But as a side effect, not a desperate chase. Let's make it practical. Imagine a leader says, I'm overwhelmed, I can't switch off, my team are dependent. Everything comes to me. A framework-based coach might go straight to prioritization, delegation tactics, time blocking, accountability structures, performance management conversations, all potentially useful, but in this approach, you might start somewhere else. You might simply listen and then ask, what is it costing you to be the person who holds it all together? Or, what feels threatened if you let someone else carry responsibility? Or, what do you believe would happen if you stopped proving yourself? Now, we're not solving workload, we're uncovering identity. And when the leader sees the belief, say it's, I'm not needed, I'm not valuable, suddenly delegation isn't a management tactic, it's an existential threat. Unless that's addressed, no delegation framework will stick. So you work with the intellect to see the belief, thorn removing thorn. And you also hold the space for the leader to reconnect to something deeper than that identity. That's the coaching. That's being. So here's the punchline. The limits of coaching appear when coaching becomes a thinking exercise, when it becomes technique, when it becomes a process applied to a person. Real executive coaching requires two dimensions, refining the belief systems, conscious and subconscious, reconnecting to self beyond thinking. And when you do both, leaders don't just become more effective, they become more aligned. And that alignment is the foundation of resilience, integrity, culture, purpose, and leadership that doesn't cost you your soul. If you're a leader watching this, here's a question to sit with. Are you trying to lead your life from your intellect or from alignment? And if you're a coach, are you relying on frameworks because they serve the client or because they protect you from not knowing? If you found this useful, subscribe, because everything on this channel is about leadership inside out, the inner mastery of thought, emotion, and perception, so you can lead without burnout, without conflict addiction, and without losing yourself.